The 99-year-old man's legs buckled as the TSA officer yanked his carry-on bag onto the inspection table. "What is this? You trying to smuggle something through my checkpoint, old man?" She barked, dumping the contents out while travelers in line craned their necks to see. He tried to explain with a trembling voice, but she cut him off. "Save it," and held up one item for everyone to see. He apologized quietly, tears streaming down his weathered face, when another officer walked over and took the item from her hands. His face changed instantly. He read something written on it, looked at the old man, then back at the first officer. And what he said next, in a voice loud enough for the entire security line to hear, made her hand fly to her mouth as she realized what she'd just done. Because that item wasn't contraband. It was something so sacred, so heartbreaking, that within minutes, every TSA officer in that terminal had stopped what they were doing to honor the man she'd just humiliated. Before we go any further, I need to know, where are you watching this from right now, and what time is it? Drop your city and country in the comments. And listen, if you haven't hit that subscribe button yet, do it now and smash that like button. Because what's about to happen in this airport is a reminder that we need to stop treating elderly people like they're problems to be managed and start seeing them as human beings with stories that matter. Sometimes the person you're dismissing has already given more than you ever will. Stay with me, because what was in this man's bag and why he was carrying it is going to absolutely wreck you in the best possible way. And what happens when the truth comes out is going to restore your faith in humanity. His name was Edward Mitchell, and he was 99 years old. Edward had been born in 1925 in a small farming town in Iowa. He'd grown up during the Depression, the youngest of 6 children, learning to work before he learned to read. His family had been poor. Everyone had been poor. But they'd survived on what they could grow and what neighbors would share. Edward had gone to a one-room schoolhouse through 8th grade, then had quit to work full-time on the family farm. There hadn't been money for high school. There had barely been money for food. When he was 18, the war had still been raging. It was 1943. Edward's 3 older brothers had already enlisted, 2 in the Army, 1 in the Navy. Edward had wanted to go too, had felt like he was supposed to go, like every young man in America was supposed to go. But his father had needed him on the farm. His mother had begged him to wait. "Just 1 more year," she'd said. "Just until your brother comes home and can help your father." But his brother hadn't come home. None of them had. All 3 had been killed within 6 months of each other, 1 at Normandy, 1 in the Pacific, 1 in a training accident before he ever saw the combat. 3 Western Union telegrams in 6 months. Edward could still remember his mother's face when the 3rd one arrived. How she'd collapsed on the porch. How she'd stopped talking for 2 weeks. How she'd never been the same. Edward had enlisted the day after his 19th birthday. He joined the Army, had gone to basic training, and had been assigned to an artillery unit. By the time he'd finished training, the war in Europe was over. But the Pacific was still burning. Edward had been shipped out in July 1945. Had been on a transport ship heading toward the invasion of Japan when the bombs had been dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. The war had ended before Edward had fired a single shot. He'd stayed in the Army for another year, part of the occupation forces in Japan. He'd seen the devastation, the rubble, the survivors picking through the ruins of their cities. He'd been 19, 20 years old, trying to process what he was seeing, trying to understand how humans did this to each other. He'd come home in 1946. had used the GI Bill to get a high school diploma and then an associate degree in mechanical engineering. He'd gotten a job at a factory making farm equipment, had worked there for 41 years, had retired in 1987. He'd married a woman named Louise in 1948. She'd been a librarian, quiet and kind, with a smile that had made Edward feel like the luckiest man alive. They'd had 2 children, a son named Robert and a daughter named Caroline. They'd raised them in a small house with a yard, had saved carefully, had taken 1 vacation a year to visit family or see a national park. They'd been happy. Not rich, not famous, not special. Just happy. Louise had died 9 years ago. Alzheimer's. She'd faded slowly over 5 years, forgetting Edward's name, then forgetting she'd been married, then forgetting how to speak. Edward had cared for her at home until the very end, had held her hand when she'd taken her last breath, had told her he loved her even though he knew she couldn't hear him anymore. He'd buried her next to the plot he'd bought for himself, had visited her grave every week for 9 years. Edward's son Robert had died 3 years ago. Heart attack at 69. Sudden, unexpected, devastating. Caroline was still alive, living in Seattle with her husband and 3 grown children. She called Edward once a week, visited twice a year. She was a good daughter. But she was busy. She had her own life. Edward lived alone now in a small senior apartment in Des Moines. He was in good health for 99, still walked without assistance, still had most of his mental faculties, still drove short distances, though his children had been trying to get him to stop. He lived on Social Security and a small pension, had enough to get by but not much extra. He spent his days reading, watching old westerns on TV, and visiting Louise's grave. But 3 weeks ago, Edward had received a phone call that had changed everything. It had been from a woman named Melissa Hartley, who worked for a veterans organization in France. She'd explained that they were organizing a ceremony to honor American veterans who'd served during World War II. It was going to be at a military cemetery in Normandy. The French government was covering travel expenses for any living veteran who wanted to attend. "We know there aren't many of you left, Mr. Mitchell. We'd be honored if you could join us." Edward had been overwhelmed. He'd never been to Normandy. He'd never seen where his brothers had fought and died. He'd spent 79 years imagining it, dreaming about it, wondering what it had looked like when his brother John had taken his last breath on Omaha Beach. And now he was being invited to see it, to stand where John had stood, to honor him properly. Edward had said yes immediately. Caroline had been worried. He was 99. The trip would be exhausting. What if something happened? But Edward had been firm. "I'm going. I need to go. I need to see where John died." The ceremony was in 2 days. Edward's flight was today. He'd packed carefully, just a small carry-on bag. He didn't need much. A change of clothes, his medications, his toiletries. And the one thing he couldn't leave behind: John's dog tags. They'd been sent back to Edward's family in 1944, along with John's personal effects. A wallet, a few letters, a photograph of their mother, and the dog tags, stamped with John's name, serial number, blood type, and religion. Edward's mother had kept them in a wooden box on her dresser until she died. Then they'd gone to Edward. He'd kept them for 79 years, had held them when he missed his brother, had looked at them when he needed to remember why the war had mattered. He'd planned to bring them to Normandy, to hold them when he stood at the cemetery. Maybe to leave them there, buried near where John had fallen, so his brother wouldn't be alone anymore. Edward had arrived at the Des Moines airport 3 hours before his flight, the way you were supposed to. He'd checked in at the counter, had been given his boarding pass, and had headed toward security. The lines had been long. It always seemed like lines were long now. But Edward had waited patiently, leaning on his cane, his small carry-on bag hanging from his shoulder. When he'd finally reached the front of the line, a TSA officer, a woman in her 30s named Brenda Kowalski, had checked his ID and boarding pass and had waved him through to the scanning area. Edward had put his bag on the conveyor belt, had removed his shoes slowly and carefully, had walked through the metal detector when instructed. The metal detector had beeped. Brenda had called him back, had waved a handheld scanner over him. It had beeped near his chest. "What do you have in your pocket, sir?" Edward had reached into his shirt pocket and had pulled out the dog tags. "My brother's dog tags. From the war." Brenda had taken them from his hand, without asking, had examined them. "These are metal. You can't bring them through security." "What? Why not?" "Metal objects have to go through the scanner. You should have put them in your bag." "I'm sorry, I didn't know." "Can I just put them in my bag now?" "Too late. Your bag already went through." Brenda had pointed at the carry-on sitting on the inspection table, flagged for additional screening. "And that bag got flagged. What's in it?" "Just clothes and my medications." Brenda had yanked the bag onto the table, her movements rough and impatient. "We'll see about that." She'd unzipped it and had started pulling things out. Edward's clothes, his medication bottles, his toiletries. She dumped them onto the table without care, items scattering. Travelers in line behind Edward had craned their necks to see what was happening. Edward had felt his face go hot with embarrassment. "Please, be careful. Those are my medications." "What is this? You trying to smuggle something through my checkpoint, old man?" Brenda's voice had been loud, accusatory. She'd pulled out a small wooden box from the bottom of the bag and had held it up. "What's in here?" "That's personal. It's just..." "I'll decide what's personal. Open it." Edward's hands had been shaking as he'd tried to open the box. It was a simple wooden box, maybe 4 inches square with a small brass clasp. His mother had kept John's things in it. Edward had kept the box itself because it smelled like his mother's perfume, because it was one of the few things he had left of her. He'd gotten the clasp open and had lifted the lid. Inside were John's personal effects: the wallet, the letters, the photograph of their mother, yellowed and creased, and a small American flag, folded into a triangle, that had been draped over John's coffin before he was buried overseas. Brenda had grabbed the flag and had held it up for everyone to see. "What is this? Why are you carrying a flag?" Edward's voice had cracked. "It's my brother's burial flag, from the war. I'm taking it to Normandy, to honor him." "You can't bring this. It's a security risk." "It's a flag, a folded piece of cloth. How is that a risk?" "I don't make the rules. You can't bring it." Brenda had tossed the flag back into the box carelessly. Edward had gasped, had reached for it, but Brenda had pushed his hand away. "You need to check this bag or surrender the flag." Edward's legs had buckled. He'd caught himself on the edge of the table, his cane clattering to the floor. "Please, I've been carrying those things for 79 years. They're all I have left of my brother." "Save it. Everyone's got a sob story." Brenda had started repacking Edward's bag, shoving items in roughly. Edward had been crying now, tears streaming down his weathered face, his voice barely a whisper. "I'm sorry. I didn't know. I'm sorry." People in line had been watching. Some had looked uncomfortable. A few had pulled out phones. One woman had said, "He's 99 years old. Can't you just let him through?" Brenda had shot her a look. "Mind your business." That's when another TSA officer had walked over. His name was Marcus Webb. He was 54 years old, a Marine Corps veteran who'd served in the Gulf War, and he'd been working for TSA for 12 years. He'd seen what was happening from across the security area, and something about it had struck him wrong. He'd walked over and had taken the flag from the box in Brenda's hands. He'd looked at it, really looked at it. And then he'd seen something Brenda had missed. Pinned to the inside of the flag was a small card, handwritten in faded ink. Marcus had read it silently. Then he'd read it again. His face had changed. The professional mask had cracked. His eyes had gone wet. He'd looked at Edward. "Sir, is this your brother's flag?" Edward had nodded, unable to speak. Marcus had looked at Brenda, his voice quiet but hard as steel. "Do you know what you just did?" "I was following protocol." "You threw a burial flag. A flag that was draped over a World War II veteran's coffin. You threw it like it was trash." Marcus had turned to the growing crowd of travelers watching. His voice had risen, loud enough for everyone to hear. "This man's brother died on D-Day. He was 19 years old. This flag is all his family has left, and she just threw it on a table. Stop everything. Right now. Because what happens next is going to absolutely break you, and I need you to be ready for it. If you think TSA agents who disrespect veterans and their families deserve to be fired on the spot, drop a comment saying 'fire her' right now. And if you're still watching, smash that like button, because what Marcus does next, and how the entire airport responds, is going to show you that sometimes, just sometimes, humanity wins. And what this 99-year-old man was about to experience is proof that the world still has good people in it. Marcus had called over his supervisor, a man named Donald Pierce. Donald had taken one look at the situation. Edward crying, the flag, Brenda standing there defensively, and had known immediately something was very wrong. Marcus had explained. Donald's jaw had tightened. Donald had looked at Brenda. "My office, now." Then he'd turned to Edward, his voice gentle. "Sir, I'm so sorry. This should never have happened. You can absolutely bring these items on your flight. They're sacred, and they're going where they belong." He'd carefully placed everything back in the wooden box, had closed it with respect, and had handed it to Edward. "Your brother was a hero. Thank you for honoring him." Edward had been too overwhelmed to respond. Marcus had helped him repack his bag, had picked up his cane, had walked with him to a bench near the gate. "Sir, can I get you some water? Do you need anything?" Edward had shaken his head. "I just want to get to Normandy. I just want to see where John died." Marcus had sat beside him. "What was your brother's name?" "John Mitchell. He was 21 when he died. Omaha Beach, June 6, 1944. Marcus had been quiet for a moment. Then he'd stood. "Wait here, please." Marcus had walked back to the TSA checkpoint. He'd gathered the other officers on duty, 8 of them total. He'd explained what had happened, who Edward was, where he was going. And then he'd said, "We're going to do something, all of us." 10 minutes later, Marcus had returned to Edward's bench. With him were the 8 TSA officers, now standing in formation. Marcus had said, "Mr. Mitchell, we'd like to honor you and your brother, if that's okay." Edward had looked up, confused. Marcus had nodded to the officers. In unison, they'd saluted. A crisp, formal military salute, held for a long moment. Other travelers had stopped, had stared. Some had started recording on their phones. Marcus had spoken, his voice carrying through the terminal. "On behalf of the Transportation Security Administration and the United States of America, we honor your brother's service and sacrifice. And we honor you for keeping his memory alive for 79 years. Thank you, sir. Edward had tried to stand, had managed to get halfway up before his legs gave out again. Marcus and another officer had helped him. Edward had been sobbing now, his whole body shaking. Thank you. Thank you. But Marcus wasn't done. He'd made an announcement over the airport PA system. Ladies and gentlemen, we have a very special traveler with us today. His name is Edward Mitchell. He's 99 years old, and he's flying to Normandy to honor his brother who died on D-Day in 1944. If you'd like to join us in thanking Mr. Mitchell for his family's sacrifice, please meet us at Gate B7. Within 20 minutes, over 200 people had gathered at Gate B7. Travelers, airport staff, flight crews, pilots. They'd lined the walkway from the security checkpoint to the gate. As Edward had walked through, slowly, leaning on Marcus's arm, every single person had applauded. Some had saluted, many had been crying. A little girl, maybe 7 years old, had walked up to Edward and had handed him a drawing she'd made on the back of a napkin. It was an American flag. She'd said, "Thank you for your brother." Edward had knelt down. It had taken him a full minute, his knees screaming, and had hugged her. "You're welcome, sweetheart." The gate agent had upgraded Edward to first class. The pilot had come out to shake his hand. Flight attendants had asked if they could take photos with him. Edward had been overwhelmed, embarrassed by the attention, but also profoundly moved. The video of the TSA officer saluting Edward had been posted online by multiple travelers. It had gone viral within hours. Millions of views, thousands of comments. This is what America should be. This made me cry. We need more people like Marcus Webb. News outlets had picked it up. Edward's story had been featured on national news. The ceremony in Normandy had learned about it and had added a special segment to honor Edward specifically. When his flight landed in Paris, he'd been met by French military officials and American embassy staff. They'd escorted him to Normandy with full honors. The ceremony itself had been held at the American cemetery in Colleville-sur-Mer, overlooking Omaha Beach. 9,000 white crosses and stars of David stretched across the green hills. Edward had walked through them slowly, looking for John's name. He'd found it on the wall of the missing, those whose bodies had never been recovered. John Mitchell, private. Died June 6, 1944. Edward had stood there for a long time, holding the dog tags, holding the folded flag. He'd told John about his life, about Louise, about their kids, about the years that had passed, about the world that had changed. "I'm sorry it took me so long to come here, John. But I'm here now, and I wanted you to know that we never forgot you. We never stopped loving you." He'd buried the dog tags at the base of the wall. He'd left the flag there too, folded and placed carefully. It felt right. John should have something of home with him. The French officials had presented Edward with a medal, the Legion of Honor, France's highest distinction. They'd thanked him for his family's sacrifice. American veterans in attendance had saluted him. Hundreds of people had lined up to shake his hand, to thank him, to tell him their own stories of loss and service. Edward had returned to Iowa a week later. He'd been exhausted but at peace in a way he hadn't felt in decades. He'd finally done what he'd needed to do. He'd finally said goodbye to John properly. But the story hadn't ended there, because Brenda Kowalski, the TSA officer who'd humiliated Edward, had been fired. The video of her treatment of him, combined with an investigation that revealed she'd been the subject of multiple complaints for rude behavior toward elderly and disabled travelers, had been enough. TSA had issued a statement. "The behavior displayed does not reflect our values or our training. The officer in question is no longer with the agency." Marcus Webb, on the other hand, had been promoted. He'd been recognized nationally for his compassion and quick thinking. He'd been invited to speak at veteran events, at TSA training sessions, at schools. He'd told Edward's story over and over, never letting people forget what it meant to honor those who'd served. And Edward had become a symbol, a reminder that the men and women who fought in World War II were disappearing, that soon there would be none left, and that we owed them more than our neglect. Schools had invited him to speak. Veterans organizations had honored him. He'd received thousands of letters from people thanking him for keeping John's memory alive. Edward lived another 13 months after his trip to Normandy. He died peacefully in his sleep at 100 years old, in his apartment, with Caroline at his side. At his funeral, Marcus Webb had been there. So had representatives from the French government, from the American Legion, from TSA. So had dozens of people who'd seen the video and had been moved by his story. The eulogy had been delivered by a Marine Corps chaplain. He'd spoken about Edward's life, his service, his devotion to his brother's memory. And he'd read the card that had been pinned inside John's burial flag. The card Marcus had read at the airport security checkpoint. The card that had changed everything. It had been written in Edward's mother's handwriting, dated 1944. To my son John, you were brave, you were kind, you were loved. You gave everything for a country that will never forget you. Your mother will carry you in her heart until we meet again. And when that day comes, I'll tell you how proud I am. I'll tell you that you mattered. And I'll hold you the way I held you when you were small. And I'll never let you go again. There hadn't been a dry eye in the church. Edward was buried next to Louise, just as he'd planned. On his headstone, beneath his name and dates, was an inscription. Brother of John Mitchell, Pufner, U.S. Army, 1923-1944. He kept the faith. And in Des Moines Airport, at the TSA checkpoint where Edward had been stopped, a small plaque was installed. It showed a photo of Edward at 99, smiling, holding John's dog tags. Beneath it, the inscription read, "In honor of Edward Mitchell, 1925-2024, and his brother John Mitchell, 1923-1944. May we never forget those who gave all, or those who keep their memory alive. Greater love has no one than this, to lay down one's life for one's friends." John 15:13. Every TSA officer who worked at that airport passed that plaque every day. And every one of them was reminded, the people going through your checkpoint aren't just travelers. They're human beings. They have stories. They have losses. They have things they're carrying that matter more than you can imagine. And sometimes, what looks like a problem is actually something sacred. So here's my final question, and I need you to answer honestly. If you'd been behind Edward in that security line, would you have spoken up when Brenda started treating him that way? Would you have said something? Would you have recorded it? Or would you have looked away, told yourself it wasn't your business, and let it happen? Drop your honest answer in the comments. Because the travelers who recorded that video, who spoke up, who later found Marcus and told him what they'd seen, they're the reason Brenda was held accountable. They're the reason Edward got the honor he deserved. And they're the reason this story exists, to remind us that silence in the face of cruelty is complicity. If this story wrecked you the way it wrecked me, subscribe to this channel right now, hit that like button, and share this video everywhere. Because Edward's story isn't just about one 99-year-old man carrying his brother's flag. It's about how we treat the generation that gave us everything. It's about whether we see them as inconveniences or as heroes. And it's about whether we have the courage to speak up when we see them being treated with anything less than the respect they've earned. Be Marcus Webb. See the humanity Honor the sacrifice. And never, ever let a Brenda Kowalski make someone feel small for carrying something sacred. What are you going to choose?